It was supposed to be the most beautiful day of Emily Carter's life. She had spent months carefully planning every detail of her wedding to Daniel Brooks, her childhood sweetheart. The white roses, the lace dress, the guest list filled with friends and family who had watched their love story grow over the years. Everything was ready. The small town of Willow Creek had been buzzing with excitement for weeks, eagerly waiting to celebrate the union of one of their most beloved couples. Emily was known for her warm smile and gentle nature, while Daniel was admired for his loyalty and hard work. Together, they seemed perfect, and everyone believed their wedding day would simply be the beginning of a happy life. On the morning of the ceremony, Emily's closest friend stopped by her apartment to drop off a last-minute gift, but found the door locked. Assuming Emily was getting ready, she left it outside. Hours later, as guests filled the old church, excitement turned into nervous glances when the bride failed to appear. Daniel waited at the altar, his hands trembling, his heart racing as he stared at the entrance, expecting to see her walk in at any moment. Minutes passed, then an hour, then panic. Someone rushed to Emily's apartment. Her car was still parked outside. Her wedding dress was hanging neatly in the closet, untouched. Her phone, makeup, and even the breakfast she had half prepared were still there. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Calls were made. Friends searched nearby streets and shops. The police were quickly involved. Search teams combed the woods, drained small lakes, and checked every corner of the quiet town. Flyers with Emily's photo covered every telephone, pole, gas station window, and community board. Police questioned Daniel extensively, but his story remained consistent. He had spoken to Emily the night before, and she seemed happy, even excited. There were no signs of a fight, no evidence of her planning to leave. As days turned into weeks, theories began to spread. Some believed Emily had gotten cold feet and fled, unable to face the weight of marriage. Others whispered about possible secrets, suggesting maybe she had fallen for someone else. A few even wondered if she had been taken by a stranger passing through town. The case gained attention across the region, and news stations covered it heavily in the beginning. But as time went on, new stories took its place. Leads dried up. Emily's parents pleaded for answers, their faces worn down by grief. They searched tirelessly, organizing community events to keep the investigation alive. Daniel made emotional appearances on television, begging Emily to come back, still refusing to believe she would have left him by choice. But with no body, no evidence, and no witnesses, the case slowly lost its grip on the public's attention. Eventually, the search parties stopped. The investigators moved on to other cases. The wedding that never happened became a ghost story in Willow Creek, a painful mystery that everyone talked about in hushed tones, but no one could solve. Emily's apartment was eventually cleared out, her belongings given to family or sold. The space was cleaned and rented to new tenants. Life in Willow Creek returned to its quiet rhythm, but the question of what really happened to Emily Carter never left the hearts of those who knew her. Even as the years passed, there remained a sense of something unfinished, something deeply wrong. And though the world seemed to forget, the truth about Emily's disappearance was buried much closer than anyone had ever imagined. 12 long years passed, but the memory of Emily Carter's disappearance never truly faded from Willow Creek. The small town moved forward, but a quiet shadow lingered. Some people eventually stopped talking about it, pushing the story deep into the corners of their minds, pretending it was just a painful chapter they had to forget. Others, especially those close to Emily, never stopped wondering. Every now and then, someone would bring up her name, usually in quiet conversations at the local cafe or whispered exchanges at the grocery store. The story of the bride who vanished on her wedding day became almost like a local legend, something that didn't seem real anymore but still sent a chill through those who remembered. The empty space Emily left behind was most visible in Daniel's life. After years of carrying the weight of unanswered questions, he eventually moved away, leaving the town where every street corner held a memory of her. People said he couldn't bear to walk past the church, the park, or the coffee shop where they once spent their time together. His departure felt like the final chapter of a story that never had an ending. Emily's parents, once full of hope that she would return, passed away without ever knowing what happened to their daughter. Their home, filled with photos of Emily, sat quietly until it was sold to strangers who never knew the pain that once lived inside its walls. Over the years, Emily's old apartment was rented out to different people. Some stayed for a few months, others for years. The wooden floors creaked, the windows fogged in the winter, and life continued around the same space where she had last been seen. No one ever reported anything unusual. There were no odd smells, no strange sights, no sounds that raised suspicion. It was as if the apartment had quietly erased its own history, covering the tragedy beneath layers of new furniture, new paint, and new memories. Yet beneath the surface, the truth remained. Detective Lavra Mills, a young officer back when Emily vanished, never fully let go of the case. Even when her supervisors told her it was time to move on, she would occasionally revisit the files late at night, long after everyone else had gone home. Something about the story always bothered her. People don't just vanish. Theories about Emily running away made little sense to her. Why would someone leave everything behind without a trace? There were no signs she planned to start a new life, no records of her traveling, no mysterious phone calls leading up to that day. Mills often thought about the little details, the untouched wedding dress, the uneaten breakfast, the locked door. These were pieces of a puzzle that never fit the way they should. The town itself began to settle into a new rhythm, focusing on other things. New families moved in. New stories took root. The house where Emily's parents once lived became just another address. Her name stopped appearing in newspapers, and her face disappeared from bulletin boards. Still, Lavra Mills couldn't forget. Occasionally, when she passed by Emily's old street, she would slow her car down, her eyes scanning the familiar apartment building as if expecting some hidden clue to suddenly reveal itself after all these years. Everyone else seemed to accept that the mystery would never be solved, but Mills didn't. Somewhere deep inside, she believed that the answers were still there, waiting to be uncovered. The town may have chosen to forget, but the truth had not disappeared. It was still there, silent and buried, waiting for the right moment to come back to the surface. And soon, without warning, that moment would arrive in the most unexpected way. It was an ordinary morning when the phone rang at the Willow Creek Police Department. A local construction crew had started renovations on Emily Carter's old apartment. The building had been purchased by a new owner who wanted to modernize the units. The crew had begun by tearing up the old wooden floors that had been part of the apartment since long before Emily ever lived there. As they pried up the floorboards, they found something that made them stop in their tracks. Beneath the wooden planks, tightly wrapped in layers of decayed plastic, were human remains. The workers immediately called the police. When Detective Lavra Mills arrived at the scene, her heart pounded. For 12 years, she had quietly carried this case, refusing to let go of the unanswered questions. Now standing inside the same apartment where the story began, she finally faced what she had always suspected. The truth had never left. Forensic teams quickly secured the area. They carefully removed the remains and collected every piece of possible evidence. When the results came back, it was confirmed beyond doubt. The body was Emily Carter. She had never run away. She had never left town. All those years of searching had been in vain because she had been hidden inside her own home, under the feet of people who unknowingly lived above her. The news swept through Willow Creek like wildfire. People who once believed Emily had simply vanished were forced to confront the horrifying reality. The theories about her running away or starting a secret life collapsed instantly. The quiet apartment that many had called home over the years now felt like a haunted place, a chilling reminder of how something so terrible could remain undiscovered for so long. The apartment had been rented by different tenants, cleaned, and even lightly renovated over the years, but no one had ever realized what was just beneath them. There had been no strong odor, no visible signs, nothing to alert anyone. It became clear that whoever hid Emily there had done it carefully, sealing her body in a way that prevented the usual signs of decay from being noticed. Detective Mills immediately reopened the case. She reviewed every detail from the original investigation, this time with sharper focus. She thought about all the people who had been questioned back then, especially those who had access to Emily's apartment. In the days before her disappearance, one name kept surfacing, a local handyman named Greg Turner. Greg had been hired to do small repairs in the building around the time Emily vanished. In the old reports, Greg's name was barely mentioned. He told police at the time that he had fixed a sink in one of the nearby apartments, and no one had looked deeper. But as Mills combed through old maintenance records, something strange appeared. Greg had also done work inside Emily's apartment just days before her wedding. One repair stood out, a note about replacing a section of the floor near the bedroom. Back then, it seemed like a routine job, but now, it was a red flag that couldn't be ignored. Mills tracked Greg down. He still lived in Willow Creek, working odd jobs and blending into the background. For years, he had walked the same streets, passed the same buildings, all while carrying a secret no one had discovered. The weight of what Mills was uncovering pressed on her, but she knew she was close to finding out the full story. The discovery of Emily's body was not just the key to solving the case. It was the beginning of revealing how far someone would go to bury the truth. Detective Laura Mills knew she had to move carefully. After 12 years, evidence was fragile and memories had faded, but Greg Turner's name was now at the center of everything. She went back to the old maintenance records, double-checking every job Greg had been assigned in the building. The repair inside Emily's apartment days before her disappearance could no longer be seen as a coincidence. Mills also reviewed photographs taken during the original investigation. She noticed that a section of the wooden floor near the bedroom looked newer than the surrounding boards. At the time, no one had considered this detail important. It was simply assumed that Emily or a previous tenant had made some home improvements. Now that small, overlooked clue pointed to something far more disturbing. Mills began interviewing people who had lived in the building over the years. Some recalled seeing Greg working in the halls, fixing doors or leaky pipes. Others barely remembered him at all. He had always been quiet, polite, and seemed to know his way around the building like he belonged there. No one had ever suspected that he might be hiding a terrible secret. When Mills requested the original police interview notes, she found that Greg's story had been taken at face value. He claimed he had been working on a broken sink in another apartment the morning Emily disappeared. But there was no work order to back it up. His only documented task was the floor repair in Emily's unit. Determined to confront him, Mills arranged to meet Greg under the pretense of routine follow-up questions. When she sat across from him, she carefully observed his body language. At first, Greg seemed calm, answering questions politely, as if it were just another part of his day. But as Mills pressed deeper, asking about the details of his work in Emily's apartment, Greg's answers became hesitant. He couldn't remember exactly what he had repaired, and his timeline didn't match the records. When asked why he was never properly questioned about the floor repairs, Greg simply shrugged, saying no one had asked. Mills requested access to Greg's past employment files. It turned out he had worked in multiple apartment buildings across town, but had been dismissed from some jobs for inappropriate behavior. None of these incidents were ever fully investigated, but they painted a troubling picture. Quietly, Mills built her case. Forensic teams re-examined the wooden boards that had been covering Emily's body. They found microscopic traces of tools that matched ones Greg had been known to use. It was a tiny piece of evidence, but after so many years, it was enough to prove that Greg had handled that floor. When police obtained a search warrant for his home, they uncovered an old toolbox that had traces of the same sealant used to cover the floor in Emily's apartment. Each small detail began to connect, slowly closing the gap between suspicion and proof. As more evidence came to light, Greg's calm exterior began to crack. He was brought in for formal questioning, and this time, his answers were inconsistent. Faced with the growing mountain of evidence, Greg finally confessed. He told investigators that he had been obsessed with Emily for years. He had seen her, often while working in the building, and convinced himself that they were meant to be together. On the morning of her wedding, he approached her under the excuse of checking a floor issue. But when she rejected his advances, something inside him snapped. In a violent moment, he killed her. Panicked, he used his tools to cut open the floor and hide her body, carefully sealing it to trap any smell. He finished the job quickly, left the apartment, and never told anyone. Over the years, as new tenants moved in and out, Greg remained in the background, silently carrying the weight of what he had done. The entire town had searched everywhere for Emily, never realizing that the answer had always been right beneath them. Greg Turner's confession sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. The mystery that had haunted the town for 12 years was no longer a question without an answer. Emily Carter had not run away, had not vanished by chance. She had been murdered in her own home by someone no one had suspected. Greg had been part of the town's quiet background for years, blending in so well that people barely noticed him. The horror of his secret and the way he had hidden it beneath the floorboards unsettled everyone who had once felt safe walking past Emily's old apartment. The truth was more terrifying than any of the wild theories people had whispered over the years. Detective Laura Mills felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. She had never let go of Emily's case, had spent years quietly chasing answers, and now she had them. But instead of feeling victorious, she felt the weight of the missed opportunities. The truth had been there all along, buried in the wooden floor that so many people had walked over without realizing. The photographs from the original investigation, the maintenance records, the overlooked floor repairs, all of it had pointed in the right direction, but no one had seen it. The knowledge that Emily could have been found sooner haunted Mills, even as she closed the case. Greg was charged with murder and sentenced to life in prison. He sat quietly through the trial, showing little emotion as the court heard the details of what he had done. His obsession with Emily, his carefully planned cover-up, his ability to live with his secret for over a decade, it all shocked the community. The courtroom was filled with familiar faces from Willow Creek, people who had grown up alongside Emily, who had celebrated her engagement, who had attended the church the day she never arrived. The pain in the room was heavy, but there was also a sense of closure, a long-awaited answer to the question that had lingered for far too long. News of the case spread beyond Willow Creek. People across the region were stunned by the story of a missing bride, whose body had been hidden beneath the very place she called home. Reporters covered the case in detail, focusing on how such a carefully planned crime could remain undetected for so many years. The story became a chilling reminder of how easy it is to miss what is hidden in plain sight.